Hello, this is Linda Vettrus-Nichols, and I have with me the most amazing woman, Adriana Smit. Welcome, Adriana.
Hello, 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 Linda. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely. And you have the most amazing story of transformation. And I would love to have you share that with everyone.
Well, it's been a bit of a long journey, um, but I think looking back, one key turning point for me was when my family arrived in America when I was 10. And I had some choices to make. And I know that when we think about our childhoods, oftentimes we don't think about choices happening at this level, but my family came as refugees to America,
Wow.
and we were political and religious refugees from behind the Iron Curtain, from Romania. And I had, what I believed at the time was a childhood full of trauma and witnessing a lot of violence in my homeland. Um, Life around in the village where I was growing up and in the country that I was born. And there was a genocide going on in the country at the time. So I grew up watching a lot of family and friends disappearing, and then,
Wow.
bad things happening to people. Yeah.
Mm.
So
Big
we
time
had
trauma.
we had martial law that I was growing up under. And then for some reasons I cannot explain, even though my father was a minister, I witnessed violence in the home and domestic violence.
Wow.
So, you know, coming to the States, I knew even as a kid on the Pan Am flight at the time that I had an opportunity to somehow rewrite my life, redefine life.
Wow.
So I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I was ready for new.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, yeah. And, learning English, um, as you know, as an ESL teacher, um, took time, and acclimating takes time. But I knew in my heart of hearts that whatever this violent past was, I was ready to put an end to that cycle.
Nice.
And that's really catapulted my life forward. I mean, I spent the majority of my teens reading self-help, devouring anything I could get my hands on to understand a legacy of violence and dysfunction, and how people can get to, you know, a place in life where they accept and tolerate dysfunction to that point, because
Um,
all I knew is this wasn't for me, and I wanted to figure out a way through.
Yeah, absolutely. And yet you still were attracted to that energy, that vibration of dysfunction. And
Yeah.
that's how landed in a marriage that didn't serve you. And then you're like, yeah, no, right? And just kind of the inner vibration of you, you made it through all of that. And now the most wonderful man has stepped into your life because
That's right.
you very powerfully attracted him in. So
That's
congratulations.
right.
It's cool, isn't
Thank
it?
you.
Right?
Thank you.
And it doesn't
Yeah,
matter how much they love you until you love yourself.
that's right.
You can
Yep.
be in the greatest of situations, but whatever. Yep, and that
Yep.
was my journey too. And I did resettle actually Russian refugees, and was
Oh,
the refugee coordinator and stood up in front of the churches and sang, "Oh Lord, my God," in Russian for them. And then I had them join me in English, and they're like, "Where do I sign?" That was awesome.
it is quite a journey, yes. And for this much history, it will take decades um, to really find security and to find our center.
Yeah.
Um, those are things I didn't anticipate as a teenager. And I actually, one of the interesting things for me has been that, in my first marriage, I didn't have a partner who understood what I was bringing in terms of that past. And so there was no room to work a lot of that out together. And it was like compartmentalized into another area of life. And I raised two wonderful kids with an American man who never joined me on that journey.
Mm.
However, I did reach a point sometime around 40 where, you know, I found myself extremely alone, but I fell in love. I don't know how to explain it. There was no reciprocation. It wasn't coming from any part of my life, but I just felt like a kid in love all the time. I would go for walks, I would run errands, and I just had that glow. And everyone around me thought I was just losing it.
Yeah, right?
But it was the beginning of, I guess, me falling in love with life and appreciating life and not wanting to settle for living in extreme loneliness anymore.
Right.
So there was nowhere else to go. And somehow naturally things sprung from there. It was a whole new journey since that
Yeah,
point. Yeah.
absolutely. And you basically lost touch with your kids because of that marriage. And
Yeah.
so generating that tie with them
Yeah.
is your future. And I think that's so beautiful as well.
Yes, for some people, unfortunately, coming out of domestic violence, so there's a segment of the population that winds up losing connection to their kids, and it seems to be a modern day phenomenon that happens to more people than we realize. But for me, I knew there was no turning back. The alternative was, my life being over, and I had to decide at that point whether to empower myself and offer my kids an example of courage or stay in place and probably not make it very far in life at all.
Mm-hmm. And you have done that, my dear. That's so beautiful. And you're quite familiar with addiction and alcoholism. That's the work that you're doing with your husband today. And yes, and you had a family connection to that type of a history as well, right?
As well.
Growing
Yes.
up.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
My father, interestingly enough, he was a severe alcoholic, which I think accounted for a lot of the domestic violence, and a multitude of other things. He's been diagnosed with mental illness on a couple of accounts. And in my family, the idea was if it's in your genes, you're going to wind up down this path. But that's not been the case for me. And I'm happy to say that by restructuring my life, I've been able to go in a whole other direction. And I really am a strong believer that environment and the choices that we make play such a huge role on whether we wind up, heredity or not, whether we wind up carrying or manifesting mental illness or addiction or
Right.
even the abusive behavior of the past.
Yeah. And I love it when you had mentioned when you were like 18 years old and your father had been doing a great work in resettling refugees, but he just wasn't able to keep up. And they were asking you to step in
That's
and
right.
you put your foot down and was like, this is not the life I'm choosing. Yes, there's lots of people that need to be helped, but I don't have to be the one to help them. That was like, whoa, 18-year-olds are in their power, right?
Well, I think, I had gone so long by giving up my childhood to what I was inheriting, the pains of the past. And I really was a very compassionate and nurturing and mothering person by nature. But at that point, it was my first chance to be out of the home. I was away at college, and I just thought, I only have 4 years. Let me just see what life is about, and let me be my age for a change. And so, even though I really felt compassion for the community, I knew what they were going through, and they would have validated my contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And the state funding we were getting from Albany at that point, they were validating because they were calling me, trying to recruit me into that work. But it just wasn't a good fit at the time, and I needed to step out of the caregiver role at that point and just
Right.
grow in my own right. Yeah.
It was so beautiful that you saw it and put your foot down and put your stake in the ground, so to speak, and claimed
Yeah.
what was right for you. I just love that story, or that part of your story. And then one legacy works. So just kind of in general, the idea of leaving a legacy, and what does like one legacy mean to you, like outside of business? Just what does it mean to you, one legacy, and that it works?
Well, both my husband Paul and I feel a profound sense of oneness with all of humanity and the world that we live in. So that is picking up on a level of connection that we constantly cultivate and we live in.
Mm-hmm.
But the legacy aspect of it, we want to share with the world that everyone has the power to choose what their legacy is going to be. And that is very meaningful to folks that I serve, for example, who come out of toxic family backgrounds, because they have reached a point where they feel powerless,
Right.
and they need to be reminded that there is still a way for them to contribute, even though it may not happen with their first tribe. And
Mm-hmm.
that's all right. That's fine. They can choose it going forward, and they can redefine legacy going forward.
I love that.
Mhm.
Thank you so much.